Welcome to the Healers Café, the #1 show for medical practitioners and holistic healers to have heart-to-heart conversations about their day-to-day lives while sharing their expertise for improving your health and wellness. Welcome to the Healers Café. I have with me today Tzara Attwater. And she's a relationship development coach, and she has transformed women's lives or their relationship from broken situations to actually reconnecting towards their true emotional freedom and self-empowerment. So we're going to have an interesting talk of, first of all, how you got into this field and then who you served, and then from our little talk before, you're shifting to a different group of people. And I kind of want to look at that whole picture, from a practitioner's perspective. How's that for you, etc. But first, welcome.
Well, thank you. Lovely to be here, Manon.
Yeah. And let's start. How did this become your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that story of breaking through to actually find what your true purpose was. And so my personal story, I was in a 10-year relationship with a partner who ended up cheating on me. I walked in on him with my best friend. It's not going to be, I know I'm not the first person this has happened to. I won't be the last. But that really, I felt like I was on an aeroplane going to my dream destination, drinking margaritas, and everything was fantastic. And then suddenly I lost cabin pressure and my life crashed. And so as a result of that, I had to do a pivot. I recognized that my relationships with myself was really not healthy. I was running an anxious attachment style. And so I looked as a relationship development coach, I started training myself and doing research into that particular attachment style and understanding, I was ignoring all the red flags in relationships. I was chasing this need to be wanted. I had this big fear of being rejected. Whenever I was with my ex-partner, I'd send him a text message, and if I didn't get a text message back, I'd constantly be sending text message. So there was this anxious attachment that was running. That's led me to really heal myself and become more secure in that space, but to help other women running this attachment style, because I think it's really prevalent for women. We have this people-pleasing kind of trait that we're growing up with. And so we tend to put the needs of others before ourselves as just a kind of mothering and a nurturing, beautiful kind of aspect of womanhood. But it can have really detrimental impacts on our relationships where we don't put our needs first.
And where do you think that comes from in your, when you've discussed this with several people,
Yeah.
women, where is there a more like a scenario where you go, this makes sense. You've seen this many times.
Yes. So the anxious attachment styles, or the theory, comes from a woman called Mary Ainsworth, who did a study I think it was in the 1970s, late 1960s, and it was called the Strange Situation Study. I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
No, I haven't.
But she basically got mothers to bring or caregivers to bring their toddlers, one or 2-year-old children, into a study room that was filled with toys. And the study was really trying to understand the impact of what would happen when the mother, the caregiver, left the room and then came back in, how the child coped. And from this, she devised 3 different attachment styles: the anxious attached, the secure attached, and the avoidant attached. So there's later on that became a 4th, but just for simplicity's sake, these were the 3. And so when there's inconsistency in the childhood with a caregiver. Sometimes, you know, maybe that's because the caregiver has two jobs, is a single parent. There are all sorts of reasons. The child learns that sometimes they're going to get love, sometimes they're not. And the child can internalize this as being something wrong with them, that they need to prove or need to earn their love in some way. And so how this manifests in us as adults, in our adult relationships, is that we constantly feel like we need to prove ourselves, that if something's going wrong in the relationship, it's our fault, that we're not good enough in some way, and that we're constantly trying to please. Conversely, the avoidant person really significantly experienced a significant amount of trauma and neglect as a child. So they learned to disassociate from their emotions and to, you know, I use this word loosely, but pretend like there's nothing going on. I don't need your help. I don't need you. And so we get this emotionally avoidant kind of traits occurring. So what happens in the dating pool is that you have a lot of anxious and avoidant people in the dating pool constantly triggering each other, right? Constantly. So the avoidant is getting away from somebody because that's their coping style, to get away from emotions, whereas the anxious person is needy and is clingy and is wanting to that constant reassurance because of a fear of being rejected. So that was what I was running. And you know, as we know, when we run these fears, what ends up happening is the very thing that we're fearful of ends up happening. And like I said, I walked in on my partner and everything changed for me in that way. So I started working with women in this anxious attachment space. And as a result of that, we touched on it a little bit, but after COVID or during COVID, I ended up building a motorhome and you know, embracing my own fears, and had the courage to do a circumnavigate around Australia. And I took 2 years, built my motorhome, and did a solo trip around Australia. I think I've got a little map I could present to you. For people that can see this is, I don't know if this is going to work.
It's
There it is. All right. So all those little dots that you can see on the map are where I took photographs, and on a GPS, it's an app, was plotting my journey all the way around. So that was some over 33,000 kilometers, I think, that I did in 2 years. Most amazing experience. But that really taught me about resilience, and really helped me heal this anxious attachment style, and really brought some more compassion to it for me. So now I'm kind of pivoting into helping workplace anxiety, and seeing where that helps leaders in corporations, because I believe that we're all leaders of self. So every day we have to show up and support ourselves and be the lighthouse for ourselves. And so that self-leadership is where I'm really focusing on now.
But I mean, there must be some commonality, right? Like at the base of it, the traumas or the behaviors, you know, once you bring consciousness to it, I don't know what you use as methodology to help people actually with either sector, but what is it you do to like what did you learn from your 2-year journey
Yes, true.
that made you realize that you could help people and facilitate it, basically?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think what I needed to understand, or what the anxious person needs to understand, is to be comfortable enough with space. And so that distance between another person, there's this fear of rejection occurring. And so there needs to be this closure, whether it's physical, mental, emotional. There's this desire to close this space. So on my journey around Australia, I was alone. I was by myself, and really got comfortable with my own space. And that helped me get some distance over my own behavior patterns. So getting comfortable with space in all aspects is one of the main things that I work with my clients on, but also this overthinking, what I call ruminating, mind reading, making an assumption about what somebody else is thinking or feeling is a massive one, because for the anxiously attached, we'll constantly kind of think, oh, you know, my boss wants me to go into the office to talk to him. That must mean he's going to fire me. We immediately go into the worst case scenario. Or, you know, I haven't heard from my partner. I've just sent him a text message. He hasn't responded in 5 minutes. Therefore, he's going to leave me. You know, this constant kind of jumping to the worst case scenario. And so looking at space and being able to be comfortable with that space, and then working on the mind reading, why we're making these assumptions. And oftentimes we're making it about ourselves rather than thinking, okay, maybe the person's busy, or maybe my boss wants to talk to me because he wants to congratulate me on what an amazing job I've just done. So rather than thinking, oh, it's something wrong with me, I'm the bad person, I'm going to be reprimanded in some way. So shifting that mind reading is another one. And then to help with the comparison, or not comparison, should I say, it's more about acknowledging what you've actually achieved rather than comparing yourself to another person who might be succeeding in relationships or in work, in business. Rather than comparing yourself to that, to actually recognize all the things that you have achieved already, all the things that, all the challenges that you've experienced in life that make up your journey of who you are, and you know, the merits that are involved with that. So it's about recognizing that. When you can do that, you can see that you've got resilience. You can see that you've got the confidence to be able to overcome all sorts of things. So those are the kind of three main things that we work with that are the biggest topics.
So when you say space, could you expand a little bit? You know, because I almost see time, but that might be my story. But
Right.
what is space for you? What
Yeah,
does
good question. Good question. So it's about, when I talk about it physically, it's about physically having space with somebody. If you're in a partnership, let's say, living with someone, working with somebody, and constantly being around somebody 24/7, rather than having your own pursuits, going and meeting your own friends and having you know, interest outside of that relationship, because when you go and have those kind of experiences, you bring a richness back into the relationship. When you're only in the space or I can't think of the word, circumnavigating one person, I can't think of the word. When you're only in their sphere,
right?
you're limiting your own experience and therefore your own learning and development. And so space is about having a friends network outside of the relationship. It doesn't mean that the relationship is going to be ending. It's about you bringing a richness back into it. So it's about shifting that mindset, flipping that switch on what space means. It's okay to be physically away, but then emotionally, you know, like I mentioned with the avoidant person, they deal with trauma or they deal with challenges by going inward, and they might be introverted and they need time alone to be able to process things. And so for the anxious person, that can be quite challenging to be able to give emotional space to somebody because of their own triggering and their own woundings and what that means. That, you know, like I mentioned with the caregiver not being consistent and not being there, there's this fear that they're going to lose that emotional connection. So space emotionally is really important, and that's where I really start with, because that's the biggest trigger for anxious people. And anxious attachment rather than anxiety is a different thing, right? And then so emotionally, physically, and mentally. And so the mental process is about stopping the rumination, stopping the overthinking. And so those are the three spaces that I work with in.
Okay, but and how do you achieve that? Like, as in, I mean, is it the consciousness of bringing it to the attention, that makes the difference, or are there methods that you use that sort of work with the subconscious?
Yeah,
Or
100%.
yeah.
So if we could probably do it now, actually. If you're ruminating, if you're overthinking, let's say you've just had an argument with somebody, it doesn't have to be a partner, it could be anybody, and you're constantly going, oh, I should have said this, or they, when they said this, I did that, and that constant rumination that goes in the mind, that voice that's talking to you, it's needing to be distracted to in order to help you be able to get over that ruminating. I suggest to people to talk out loud if you can, if you're not around other people, but to talk out loud objects that you can see around you. And by objects, I mean things that you can touch, not kind of emotional things, just
Right.
things that you can touch. So for me now, I've got my cup, phone, keyboard, desk, chair, and I just start talking those things out loud. And what will happen is the nervous system will start to calm down. I'll start to the mind will become distracted with something else, and I can start to manage and get control back over my emotional state. It's a really, really good hack, especially if you're driving, if you're driving around and you're having this rumination happening. Just start talking about tree, pavement, road, car, whatever it is that you're seeing in front of you. It's an incredibly great hack, that one.
So it's like a bit like Byron Katie's distraction method, right?
Right.
Right. So by being more present,
Yes.
calling things by simple names, you stop the wheels, the job of thoughts, which is to keep thinking.
100%, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. And that's it. So all you're trying to do is ground yourself in the moment. And so what you're forcing the mind to do is acknowledging things around you in the present moment. And it stops it going off it just needs something to be distracted with. Right?
Yeah.
And then another great trick which I use is with the ruminating, especially when we start to blame ourselves. And let's say the boss has asked you to come into his meeting room, and you're sitting there thinking, oh, what's he going to talk to me about? What's she going to say? Whatever. When you start thinking, I've done something wrong, or when you start thinking, I shouldn't have done this, or I'm a bad person in some way, try and stop and ask yourself, what am I telling myself that isn't true? What am I telling myself that isn't true? And check in with reality, check in with the actual facts. Hold on, I haven't seen my boss for over a week. What could he possibly, or what could she possibly be upset about? Maybe it's because I've done something right, or, to not kind of ruminate on it without the facts, without all the knowledge that you've got about the situation. And so to check in and just say, what am I telling myself that's not true?
Yeah, I mean, it's like distinguishing storytelling and reality, right?
Yes, exactly.
And because I don't know if it's 80 or 90% of our thoughts apparently are negative thoughts.
Yeah.
If we can become aware of that, then there are ways to stop it. One of my favorite ways, at least that I've seen with my patients when I was in practice, or even when I'm teaching, and students have a fear of getting it right. They want to desperately get it right because they're in their thoughts, and they're like, I'm not good enough. This isn't right for me. I can't do this. I'll never succeed. I'm not actually helpful, whatever their thing is.
Yep.
But what I usually tell them to do, and this is also a Byron Katie.
Okay. Yeah.
But I loved it so much when I saw her like near 20 years ago now. But anchor your thoughts, because they're doing their job. They're just thinking.
Yep. Yeah.
And what I do, this part's mine, I put it into a little cloud, and here you go, and off you go, and thank you. We've done it once, like I will listen to my thoughts one time, but when it's a pattern and it's the same old, it's like, we've been there. Thank you very much,
Right. Beautiful.
and off you go, so.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful.
What would your life be like if you were pain-free? If you were one of the millions who suffer from chronic pain, The thought of just one day without it may seem impossible. This is often because conventional medicine tends to fall short in the treatment of pain, opting to prescribe pills or recommend surgery rather than getting to the root cause of the problem. But if you are suffering with emotional or physical pain, there is hope. Join the founder and CEO of Bowen College, Manon Bolliger, live online for your body-mind reboot. Learn how to listen to your symptoms and get to the root cause of your pain. Plus, be trained in basic Bowen therapy moves so that you can reboot your body for optimal health. You don't have to live in pain. You can heal. Stop the pain pill cycle by visiting www.yourbodymindreboot.com to learn more and to register.
Beautiful. When you know, I'm a recovering perfectionist myself as well, so that judgment that would be constantly there, that feeling of like I'm not good enough, or I've got to try harder, or that voice inside the head. I use the metaphor of, you know, imagine that you're in a lift, in an elevator, or in a lift, in a really small room, and it's just you and this incredibly large kind of bully that's just standing over you and telling you, oh, I see you've done that mistake again, or you're not good enough here, or you could have tried harder. And that bully, if you stay in this room for long enough, you're going to end up believing everything the bully says. And what we forget is that we can open the door and get away. And so that's that analogy of the judgment that constantly there. Yes, it can be a beautiful motivation to help us become better. But like you're talking to, overused, if we get stuck in this room, it can be incredibly debilitating. Yeah, and so I really think that comes back to that idea of not being able to recognize the things that we've achieved, the challenges that we have overcome. We become too stuck and too focused on all the things that we haven't done, all the things that we haven't achieved, or, you know, the mistakes that we've made. You know, there's a supposition in NLP that says there are no failures, but there are only learnings, right? So you know, with every time we do something, if we make a mistake, it's not really a failure. It's just a way of us being able to learn how to do it better. You know, like we were all toddlers at one stage, right? All learning to walk, let's say. And if that little toddler had, I don't know how many times I would have fallen over as a toddler, thousands of times when I was learning to walk, right? I can't remember it, but thousands of times, if I had turned around and gone, oh, I'm never going to get this walking thing. It's, you know, I'm never going to do this. It's got me. I would never have learned how to walk. But as a toddler, we understand how to overcome a challenge. You know, when I put my foot here, it kind of, I get a bit wonky. You know, I've got to put the weight on both sides. Each time I'm adjusting. Each time I'm making a learning process, and that's the beautiful thing that we need to try and focus on, the things that we have overcome, the challenges that we've overcome, and we've been able to achieve things rather than all the mistakes we've made.
Yeah. And I think you raise a very important point here too, because it's easy in psychology to say, well, these problems came from the way my parents dealt with me, right? And the thing is, therapeutically, maybe that's worth one sentence. You could say that it's probably somewhat true, but it isn't part of the solution, right? Like going back into that past or trying to change what can't be changed, it is really the wrong focus, because like you're saying, the toddler walking, it's like, it's your ability to work with what exists, whichever way, and know that it was perfect for the time. It was what you needed then. And then to be able to be free enough to say it's not what you need now, right?
Right. And I love
it.
that.
It's like,
I
it's a
love
shift.
that, Manon. Yeah, it's beautiful because I have this belief that we're never too old to have the perfect childhood.
Right.
We have a choice, right? We have a choice about what narrative I'm using to reference. Yes, we were gifted things by our caregivers, 100%. We were gifted things. They did the best that they could with the tools that they had at the time. But as we mature and turn into adults, we also have a choice. We have a choice to what narrative am I going to use to reference? What way am I going to show up? And we have a choice in that. We have the ability to have the perfect childhood if we so wish, right? And I think it comes from taking responsibility for how we want to show up in the world. And yeah, yeah, I do like the idea that we're never too old to have the perfect childhood.
So let's talk about that transition between focused on relationship
Yeah.
and this attachment syndrome to now more wanting to talk to leaders or leaders in community who also have the same childhoods.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why the shift? Like, where are you going with this, or what do you see? How can those people?
Yeah, 100%. And so I'm seeing a pattern with the anxious attachment style and how that's showing up in the workplace, and how it's impacting not just your partner, like in a relationship space, it's just the partner, but how it's actually impacting teams and companies in general. And we give names like imposter syndrome, like I've mentioned, the overthinking, and it's the same kind of boundaries, being able to say no, not being overwhelmed by the amount of workload because you're not able to say no, you're not able to give a voice to things from this fear of being rejected. So it's the same kind of traits that's showing up in the workplace. And so I'm kind of branching out from not just matters of the heart, but in how people are relating as leaders in organizations. And I'm seeing it really impactful it can be really impactful in the workplace. So I'm looking to do a masterclass in a couple of weeks on imposter syndrome for leaders. On the 9th of December, I'm going to be doing that as a free masterclass. And I'm also looking to do tomorrow I'm doing a public speaking event and talking to leaders about the resilience that comes from, my journey around Australia, but the resilience that comes from recognizing the challenges that we've overcome in order to have the courage and the confidence to see ourselves as self-leaders. And so, it's a slight pivot, slight change of where I'm going to be going, but the issues are the same kind of thing. But I'd just like to mention as well that what I talk about as an anxious attachment isn't necessarily anxiety, which is a different kind of thing. Yeah. So anxiety, my understanding or the way I approach anxiety is it's not something that people have. A lot of people talk about, I've got anxiety, but that's impossible because anxiety is something that comes and goes, right? So it's not like, let's say I'm colorblind. If I'm colorblind, I'm going to be colorblind all the time. It's not going to be switching on and off, right? That's something that I have. But anxiety is something that I do. It's a thinking. I do it, right? And when we can actually conceptualize that, we can take control of it. We can recognize, well, if it's something I'm doing, I can actually stop it too. So anxiety, if we were to break down, what does it mean? What is actually anxiety? I mean, would you like to have a guess at what anxiety, like if you were trying to describe it to somebody, what do you think it is?
I mean, there's lots of ways of describing it, but rather you go ahead and in your framework.
Yeah. So what I say, just to try and let people understand or have a little think about if they were going to describe anxiety, how would they describe it? I say it's a projection onto a future event
Mhm.
and making that future event the worst case scenario, and then making that worst case scenario real in this moment now. So it's a
Mhm.
projection about, let's say, I'm sitting in this, I can see there's a beautiful background behind you that looks like you're outside, you know. I can make this fear that there's going to be a rhino come through the door, and
Right.
start worrying about this rhino that's coming through the door and making that real in this moment. That's anxiety, but that's a thinking process. It's
Mhm.
something that we're doing. It's not something that we have, right?
But people feel anxious, like
Sure.
an overwhelming anxiety, and
Sure.
they're not always associating it to a thought. Sometimes it feels like the thought comes after. You know, they could say, well, maybe it's because whatever. They're coming up with the many lists of things that one could become anxious of. But do you know what I mean by when people have this
Sure, but it's a
pervasive,
metastating. It's a metastating. So the thought actually occurs
right?
initially. So it's a thought, a fear, a concern, a worry of some kind. And then what happens with the emotions being attached to the emotions, it's the emotions that keep the thought running. And so it's the emotions that start layering on top of that. And that's more in the counseling space rather than the coaching space. But it's
Yeah.
really, I'm just wanting to touch on the fact that it starts off as a thought. And if we can grasp that, we can get to the point of understanding and being empowered by, I'm doing it to myself. And it's not
Yeah.
through choice. I get that. I get that it can be overwhelming and take over for some people in extreme cases. But it isn't something that we have. It's
No,
something
that I totally agree. Absolutely, yeah. And it's
yeah,
very disempowering to think of it as something we have. You know, it's like, I would in the past tell my patients, they are not the disease, right? I mean, they
yeah,
have symptoms that can be construed to be XYZ, right? Because a lot of
right,
times a diagnosis becomes an anxiety, right? You know,
right.
and then if you believe in the diagnosis fully, you can create, and then you just Google and you can go crazy. You can
Yeah,
create it even worse than it is if it actually was, you know. So that separation from these are symptoms. They could add up to this, but they could add up to that. They could, in other
right.
words, there's a bridge. There's not a bridge. There's a gap.
And
You
I
know,
love that. I love the way that you use that word separation, because that's key for anxiety, to try and get some space and some distance for anxious attachment styles, for
yes.
anxiety, just to be able to get that space. Yeah, that separation. I think it's really key. If we can get that distance and be able to see, hold on, you know, this is something that I'm doing or I'm thinking, I have a choice here, to be empowered by it. I think to be empowered that we can change that. When we run the belief that we have this, it's like it's out of my control. And I use this word with full compassion, like I'm a victim to it, right? But
Correct.
when we're in that mindset, we're actually enabling the anxiety. We're actually not empowering ourselves.
No.
We're kind of washing our hands of it, saying there's nothing I can do about it. It's enabling that helplessness and that victimizing, which people can just get really, really trapped in. And so, yeah, I'm really, really passionate about empowering people to be able to be their best, and know that they don't have to be had by these thinking patterns. It comes back to what I was saying before about, what am I telling myself that's not true?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think too, you raised the idea, at least this is the idea I'm getting from what you're saying, is when you're in an empowered state, you are the creator of your reality, right?
Yes, yeah,
Which means that you have control. It doesn't mean everything works out the way you thought it should, but
yes, yes,
but
yes,
you're actually participating in it
yes,
with consciousness and responsibility, you know, which is
yeah,
where the idea of like, oh, here's that thought again, this isn't serving me. And we're going down let's drop the thought. What next action can I do that will help me?
Yes.
Or like you said, acknowledging on some level what you've done that was right, that really
Yes.
was good. Because we don't celebrate as a, we don't, we
We
don't
don't.
spend time going, hey, that was great.
No. Well, we've got this, I mean, I don't know if in Canada, but in Australia, we've got this tall poppy syndrome, it's like you
Right.
can't kind of show what you don't go up to somebody and say, oh, I've just done this amazing thing, I'm incredible. We just don't talk like that. So it's in the narrative of the language that we get taught as children to not really kind of stand out in any way, to that's part of that narrative. So yeah, I think what you're touching on is really beautiful. I think it's also really kind of easy for us to feel in a happy and contented space, to be, oh, just be empowered and just be your true self. But when you're in that kind of, I call it funk, when you're in that kind of mental, let's say you're in the elevator with the bully,
Right.
and you're in that and you can't kind of get yourself out of that space, to check in with the body. Where am I feeling this in the body? Those are really good triggers, because by the time you're feeling it in the body, if you're getting sick, that's because it's been a thought in your process for a while. And so check in with where you're feeling in your body. Check in with your thoughts, question, what am I telling myself that's not true? What am I listening to this bully for? What's the purpose of doing that? And that therapy where you can put the monster in an imaginary chair in front of you and have a conversation with it.
Right.
And so that's part of that bully in the lift exercise, to kind of go, okay, I can open the door. I don't have to listen to you. What you're telling me isn't true. And true for you in that moment, right, is what I mean, because your truth is a partial truth. We've got what's happening in reality, right? But if you're listening to too much negativity, it's going to have an effect on the physical body. And so that's going to be a good trigger to see, am I getting headaches? Am I feeling sick here? What do I need to calm down on? So those are all really good triggers to try and help you get back to that empowered state, because it can be very difficult when you're in that funk. Yeah.
I certainly have experienced that myself, so it sounds, like you said, it sounds easy when you're on the other side of it. And maybe we have to learn, maybe that is human nature, and that's the learning, and whatever we got from it was necessary at that moment.
Yeah.
Maybe. And I think the more you're aware that you're in it and you want out, and that people got out, it's
Yes.
at least it's possible, right? We all have ways, but it's possible.
And I think just to see it as a process as well. I think a lot of the people I deal with anxious attachment styles have a very black and white thinking. It's always this or it's that. And that can really inhibit us from that growth and development, to sort of go, I walked in on my partner, so that means I'm never going to be able to find another partner. I've got to build a wall around my heart. It's this or that. It's this black and white thinking, rather than seeing it as a process. Like when we were learning to walk, it's a process of how we do it. That event happened back there. It wasn't pleasant, but it doesn't have to dictate the rest of my life. It doesn't have to impact every other decision that I'm making. Yes, I don't want to be hurt again. Yes, I want to protect my heart, but the protection of that we're seeking can potentially be detrimental and actually cause us more suffering in the long run. And so that black and white thinking, just to catch it, just to be able to sort of bring awareness to that as well.
Great. I think I'm going to leave you with those last words, because I think that's very important. The black and white thinking can be our detriment, rather than just opening the possibilities.
And I would really like to end, if there was anything that you could take away from this chat today, is to really just ask yourself what you're telling yourself that's not true. That has been an incredible mantra for me over the years. When I'm ruminating, when I'm getting upset about something, to just calm the farm and just say, you know, what am I telling myself that's not true here? And it's kind of going, what are the facts? What do I actually know about the facts? So yeah, I hope that would be of help to the listeners.
Well, thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you for letting me talk today.
Thank you for joining us at the Healers Café. If you haven't already done so, please like, comment, and subscribe with notifications on, as I post a new podcast every Wednesday with tons of useful information and tips for natural healing that you won't want to miss.